Larry, I look at the targets yesterday. Most of them are in the western part of Iran, in a state called Khuzestan. They attack Ahvaz and Dimeshq, Bandar Abbas, Khorramabad, again in the western part of Iran. And then you see the region in the southern part of Iran. They're repeating the same targets. It seems to me that in the last 2 days, they're mostly focusing in the western part of Iran. And this is the Iranian attacks, and on the part of the American attacks on Iran, the Iranian attacks are mostly focused on Kuwait, and we had some attacks in Jordan as well, but most of them are in Kuwait. The situation is getting. I don't know how many weapons do they have in Kuwait, and how many targets do they have, because they're hitting Kuwait. And yesterday we had some protests in Kuwait. People are coming out, going against the government, which is show how critical this situation is getting for the government in Kuwait.
Well, let me first come back to the case of B-1 bombers, just so everyone understands, because I think there's been, I've seen on some other channels, misinformation. Someone's saying, "Oh, the B-1 bomber can't carry a bunker buster." I'm going, it's the one aircraft in the U.S. bomber fleet that can carry the heaviest load. It can carry a bigger load than the B-52. So the B-2 bomber has half the load carrying capability of the B-1, roughly half. So the fact that they are using B-1s, and they're the ones most capable of evading air defense, including the S-400. Now, it's not to say that an S-400 couldn't shoot one down, but highly unlikely. So it's the one that can operate pretty freely. The B-52 is not in the same category at all. I mean, good God, that's a 75-year-old aircraft now, essentially. It's had upgrades over time. So the focus on these targets, it does appear that they're trying to, if you will, soften up the western part of Iran. And I believe that the Trump administration is increasingly serious about considering a land operation. It'd be insane, particularly this time of year in the summer, but they've convinced themselves that's the only way to quote defeat Iran. And I did some comparisons, and you and I talked about this yesterday. With Kemps Island, that's the size of Okinawa. And when we compare that in World War II, the United States needed 190,000 soldiers to suppress Okinawa. And my understanding from the topography of Kemps Island, it's even more rugged than anything that's on Okinawa. And then you've got Karg Island. Ironically, Karg Island is almost the exact same size as Iwo Jima. We suffered, American soldiers there suffered about 28,000 American U.S. Marines. Excuse me, calling Marine soldiers gets me into trouble. But the Marines suffered 28,000 casualties. It became an iconic battle. So, the notion that we're going to try to deploy troops to either of those islands, I don't think it's going to turn out as an iconic battle, so to speak. It could be one of those disasters that go down in history, as put it right up there with Gallipoli. So this, the problem is right now the war fever has taken hold again of Trump, and it depends, which day you talk to him, what the issue is. One day it's the Strait of Hormuz. We got to degrade them, and that's what CENTCOM saying his mission is. We got to degrade the Iranian military capability to stop any ship from transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Then the next day, Trump said, "We don't care about the Strait of Hormuz. We don't need that. No, this is about stopping Iran's nuclear program." And then you guys say, "Well, if you're stopping their nuclear program, what the hell are you doing out bombing all these positions along the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf?" So they're just making it up as they go along. That's what's frightening me. As Colonel Wilkerson knows far better than I, uh, you got to have clear. If you're carrying out a combat operation, you better have a pretty clear objective of what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then in the planning to accomplish that objective, have assembled all the necessary resources you need to do that. I don't see us doing that here.
And let's go back to Kuwait and your question, Nima. Kuwait's most sophisticated apparatus, if you will, on our behalf, was one of the best throughput facilities in the region, if not the world. We used it for 2 wars. We made it very elaborate. It has almost everything you need for marshaling forces, for moving on into the theater of war, as it were, from a position of relative safety and a place almost like an assembly area for a military operation where you're not subject to attack from the enemy. You can get your everything in order. Your operations orders can be briefed all the way down to the squad level, the team level. You can do all the things you need to do before you go into combat. Iran's destroying that. And I think from what I'm hearing, it has pretty thoroughly already destroyed it. So that means there is no place, as Larry just suggested, that you would need to marshal and assemble and get ready and go. There isn't. So you're going to be doing it from scratch. You're going to be doing it from the Osprey's cockpit or the Black Hawk or whatever else you go in means of conveyance. That's how you're going to be doing it. That's tough. Ask any of the guys in Afghanistan who were forced, for example, by Stanley McChrystal when he was in charge there, to go into very vastly distant territory and do this sort of thing from a Chinook or from some other aircraft, most likely a Black Hawk. It was a Black Hawk several times. Man, they got their ass handed to them several times because you have to do your planning and your team briefing and everything else en route, as it were, in the aircraft you're flying in on. You don't have the time to go down on the ground and assemble and make sure everybody understands the sand table and the map and is able to brief you back and tell you exactly what their mission component is and how they're going to accomplish it. You don't have that. Boom, you're in and you're dead, or you're burned up, or whatever. It's not the way you want to conduct an operation in a terrain where you have never been in your life.
Carl, when it comes to the invasion, do you think if they decide to do that, as Larry mentioned, it's going to be on the southern and the western part of Iran at the same time?
Well, I think Larry's right. The bombing seems to be prepping that. I think there's another reason for that too. I'm not that familiar with the ECM on the B-52. I know it's been upgraded majorly over the years to have some pretty good electronic countermeasures, but I don't think they want to overfly any portion of inland Iran, if you will, any further or longer than they have to. I think they want to launch things from what is already a thoroughly saturated, bombed area, and they think is relatively safe in that regard. Plus, I think in addition to softening something up for a possible land operation, I think they think that is where a considerable number of the ballistic missile launching points are, is on that, what is it, 1,800 mile, I think Ahmadinejad told me it was 1,800 miles that Iran owns on the Gulf. When you look at the turns and twists and everything else, it's not as the crow flies, it's the shoreline. When you look at that, I think they think a lot of the, and maybe they're right, maybe their intelligence, Israeli intelligence, is telling them that that's where a lot of the launchers are that are doing the most damage. I don't know that, but that would be another reason to be bombing in that area.
Larry, if they do that, they have to use the Iraqi territory or not?
What do you mean?
The invasion from the western part of Iran.
You mean a ground invasion?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well. Again, they could try to. There are 3 ways you put troops into a country, or 4 ways. So 1, you start on the ground and run across the border. So to do that, yes, it'd have to be in Iraq. Well, there's not, as Colonel Wilkerson correctly noted, you don't have an assembly point in Iraq where you could bring together, 200,000, 300,000 soldiers. And let's recall that for the 2003 invasion of Iraq, we used 165, 170,000 initially, and those were gathered in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Once you start amassing forces in one place, as he noted, they're a big fat target now with drones and short-range ballistic missiles. So it is back in 2003 they were worried about Scuds, but the Scuds were a bit of a dud. They weren't really that capable, and they certainly were not accurate with it. It was sort of spray and pray, shoot it and hope it goes someplace, but you're not sure where it's going to land. So that leaves an amphibious operation where you're going to land troops from ships. A Marine, the Army can do amphibious landings, but the Marines, that's supposedly their specialty. You're not going to get ships up into the Persian Gulf past the Strait of Hormuz to do that. So the only place they could do that would be down around Chabahar. And that leaves either you're going to drop in paratroopers or you're going to fly them in and land them, and they come piling out the back of an aircraft. Well, then you're faced with just the logistics. How many soldiers with what they call combat loads, where they're all kitted out with food, water, ammunition, rifles, or other or machine guns, or and hand grenades, and everything you're going to need to go into combat with.
180 pounds roughly.
Yeah, I mean it's that was one of the things they forced it when I went through the CIA paramilitary course. They were dealing with a group of we were now a group of people that did not have Vietnam experience, and they wanted to make sure that people understood if you're asking somebody to carry a combat load, what that was, and we had to wear one. And so when you're walking around with about 100 pounds on your back, and you're having to trudge up and down mountains, it's not easy. But the total number of combat loaded soldiers that can go on just a C-130 is only 92, 96. On a C-17, I thought it would be, a much larger number. It's 126, at least the sources I've looked at. So what you're talking about is to put any kind of substantial force, other than just, you put a company-sized element, 150 guys, against a target that's the size, like Kharg Island, the size of Iwo Jima. It looks small on the map as you're looking at it online, but you put your feet on the ground, it's not something you can just run around in an hour. So it is the entire premise of ground operations carries with it so many different obstacles. And then when you top it off, that in this summer heat where you're pegging temperatures in excess of 115 degrees Fahrenheit or 51 degrees Celsius, you got to have water. I mean, again, if you've never been in that kind of heat and carrying a heavy load, and you don't understand how much you sweat, and as that sweat you're sweating, you got to replace those fluids, and not just with water, with electrolytes. And if you don't, you become combat ineffective. And so then how do you resupply? Let's say they got 2,000 guys on the ground. That's a hell of a lot of water, and just the weight of it alone, you're going to parachute it in? And all of this assumes that we've got our aircraft can freely enter and leave that airspace, and Iran's not going to do anything. It's just from a military planning standpoint, it's a nightmare.
Now I can tell you, Larry's right about the combat load. Any good GI or Marine carries twice what the TO&E says he's supposed to carry. They carry extra machine gun ammunition, extra mortar rounds, extra water, you name it. They're going to carry all kinds of extra things. So when you get up that weight then you're even more in need of water, especially in high heat environment. And Larry's right. Where are you going to get it from? How are you going to get it to the troops without getting yourself massacred? It just doesn't make any sense. Any scenario you draw up for the southern coast of Iran, or for that matter, the western coast of Iran on the Gulf, any scenario you draw up, terrain-wise, heat-wise, experience-wise, load-wise, entryway-wise, is nonsense. And Hegseth, I bet you right now, could not tell you any of this if you sat him down and drilled him. Nor could Kane. Neither one of them. Never make an Air Force officer chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, quote, unquote, Colin Powell.
Yeah. Because the battlefield is on the ground, not in the air.
Bingo. Bingo. All Air Force officers know how to do is, what are we seeing right now? Drop bombs. I'm not denigrating Air Force officers. There's a place for them on the battlefield. But as a soldier, as a GI, and as a man who spent 12 years with the Marines, I'll tell you this right now, and this was at least the Marine philosophy. You need people who understand what's going on the ground, in the air. Because if you don't have people in the air understanding what that Marine is going through on the ground, you are not going to have close air support. You're not going to have good aviation support in general, and you're going to lose. And I don't know how far we've gotten away from that, but in the Army, I know we have an Air Force inside the Army. So that's another problem. We have Apache pilots who fly across the ocean and stick their skids in the water.
The point is, we have the war in Ukraine for more than we're approaching 5 years of the war. And it's all about, you don't see that much of Air Force going on in Ukraine. It's all about
for the Russians. The Russians have I'd say the Russians have pretty much local air superiority, if not wholesale air superiority. And they don't have wholesale because any fool can shoot down an aircraft from time to time, especially when the battlefield's littered with instrumentation, therefore.
Maybe they feel differently, Larry. How do you see that? Because usually the Trump administration sees even what Joe Biden did with Yemen, said they're not doing a great job against Yemen. We're going to do it our way, and they went there. Maybe right now with the invasion, they would say, no, we're going to have our own method of invading Iran, and we're going to do it basically with the Air Force or some small group of forces on the ground.
Yeah. I'm old enough, and because of the experiences I've had, I've been fortunate to have a number of friends. One of my old friends, he was a young ranger in 1980 on Operation Eagle Claw. So that was when this was in the early days. The Delta Force had just been created. They really didn't have a specialized Task Force 160, which are known as the night flyers, the night stalkers. It's a helicopter unit designed to carry special operations forces. That really hadn't been stood up yet, or was in its very, very early days. So they had sort of a lash up of different equipment. But anyway, he was there on the ground when a dust storm kicked up. They had a C-130 that had come in, and they also had some helicopters. And one of the helicopters and planes collided. And I forget if it killed 4 or it killed 6. But they had to cancel the exercise at that point. They didn't have enough. They had to cancel the operation. It was designed to conduct a rescue of the hostages in Tehran. And we also had there were members of a unit. It was originally called ISA, but they were on the ground as well in Tehran, ready to assist with transportation and such. But the operation went bust. So, but I've known these people over the years and know what our capabilities are in terms of special operations. And listen, they're great people. They've got the special operations forces. They have a higher level of skill and motivation than just your regular conventional Army, Air Force, Marine. And it's not to denigrate them, but these people that have gone through these different they're at another level. But even with all that skill, all that ability, they're still human beings. They bleed, they die, and they need water. They may be able to endure some physical discomfort for a longer period of time than your average person, but ultimately you cannot escape your body. The body degrades. So and they don't have magical skill to resist heat. 115 degrees. I don't care who the hell you are. It can kill your ass. So that's why I said this. A lot of the people I hear talking about doing this are people who've never done it, never had to be in that position to actually do it. They've watched enough Hollywood movies and decided that they've got expertise based on that.
Yeah.
Just to emphasize that, my former mech company, XO, commanded the 160th Special Operation Aviation Regiment. And I can tell you that, and it was demonstrated fairly conclusively in Venezuela from what I have been briefed. They're very good. They're extraordinarily better than that hodgepodge group of people assembled for Eagle Claw in the deserts of Iran. We learned a lot of lessons. But he would also tell you that they're not Supermen. And while they might advertise that, they might put that on logos and such, they understand that. They're smart people. They're probably the smartest people in the military. And I can't imagine this group of people in any configuration signing up. I can imagine them being forced to do it because of their loyalty to the system and to the services, to some kind of half-ass operation like what I think Larry has very well described, and I know is probably the reality, because you're just sacrificing them. That's all you're doing. This isn't Venezuela.
Yeah, it reminds me, again, I've been fortunate. I was mentored in life. A couple of, he was the last 06, the last colonel to be the commander of Soxent. And this was, he retired like a month before Desert Storm in 1990. Tried to go back in, but Schwarzkopf hated him. His name was Larry Dugan. And Dugan actually wrote Jopes, the whole planning. He wrote the damn thing, and dealing with him was like dealing with a Talmudic scholar. And then my immediate boss at State, Dominic Richard Aloysius Gannon, a retired Marine colonel, and he'd commanded the 5th Marines, did 2 tours in Vietnam. And so both were really important men in shaping me and teaching me. And but I recall Dick's story when he had arrived at State just before the operation in Grenada. And during that operation, the State Department said, "Oh, we absolutely got to have these Navy SEALs to carry out this mission." So, Dick was the liaison and got that pass back up the chain of command through DOD, and those SEALs went out and they drowned. And so when Dick got the news, he went back into the State Department task force to the task force leaders. These were the senior people at State at the time. And he said, "Look, there's been, this is the result. So they're going to send out another team." And the State Department people went, "It doesn't. Nah, we don't. It doesn't matter. It's no big deal." And he almost had to be restrained because his just to have such a carelessness towards the lives of soldiers, Marines, sailors, that was evident in just that, they were giving orders without understanding the human cost at the end of that order. And so, and that's stuck with me all these years. Good God, that's now almost 40 years ago.